Coach Mike Krzyzewski at Duke announcing he will retire after next season. So one last run with Coach K. He's going to pull the Kobe, Dwayne Wade retirement tour and go around and say goodbye to everybody across his next season, his last season. And Moon Urson officially announcing that she is going to LSU to play basketball for Kim Mulkey in her last year of eligibility. So a lot going on, and now we bring on Morgan Uber to help us break it down, Big 12 digital correspondent. Morgan, I like the intro there. I didn't even mention baseball and softball that are also going on. It's just, sports just don't end.
Yeah, talk about a crazy news day, something, two things that you and I probably, weren't really prepared to talk about at the top of this show, top of this hour. You mentioned Coach K, his name basically synonymous with college basketball, and the Moon Urson news breaking about 20 minutes ago. So I, was able to see those two things right before I came on to hop on here and talk it all and break it all down with you.
Well, Morgan, let's start. I'll throw you one about Coach K just because, again, we're obligated to talk about it. Last season, not great for Duke, and the COVID deal, even the year before that, Duke has just not been the Duke of old, quote unquote, although they have a national championship in the last, 6 seasons. With that, though, transfer portal, the game changing in college basketball, and it's the old dogs can't learn new tricks. It seemed like recruiting the transfer portal, different things of that nature have taken a toll on Coach K, and he's just old. But what an illustrious career. Now retirement season on the cusp. I mean, just your assessment of the news that Coach K is now 1 year away from leaving the game.
Yeah, I mean, shocking, but at the same time, we knew this day would come eventually, especially just a couple months ago, we heard the news that, Roy Williams announcing his retirement. So pretty crazy that both of these things, happening in the span of just a few months of each other. But, Coach K, what he has done there at Duke, I mean, both you and I, our entire lifetimes, we've grown up watching him, the head coach there. He's been there since 1980, Drake. I had to look that up. I knew it had been a very long time, but wasn't exactly sure how long. But, 12 Final Fours there at Duke, and, just an illustrious career. Like you mentioned, he'll definitely go down, as a legend, one that changed the game, for the better in a great way. And, I know you're going to have Chris Budden on later in the show, and she's had a lot of opportunities to cover Duke and, be around him and interview him. So she'll definitely be able to give you some great perspective. But, I've been able to watch from a distance, and, Duke is, as a young kid, just a team that we all grew up watching because of what he did and the, legendary program that he created there, and, definitely going to go down as one of the best of all time.
Morgan, from men's basketball to women's basketball, Moon Urson announcing she would go with Kim Mulkey to LSU and play for the Tigers after leaving about a month limbo in between where folks thought maybe she comes back. Now she officially announces that she'll be in Baton Rouge. That's a big loss for Baylor and a big get for Kim Mulkey as she starts her era as a Tiger.
It definitely is. And this is one of the things that we were kind of waiting to see and shake out. And, with Coach Cullen, one of the things that she's talked about doing is recruiting the players that she has there to stay. And unfortunately, this is one that got away. And, Moon, what she did at Baylor with Coach Mulkey, just an incredible career. And that she's going to continue to do great things at LSU. Certainly, a big loss for Baylor, but a great get for Mulkey and the Tigers.
Morgan, moving from the basketball scene, I know there's still a lot going on there. Well, I say let's stay right there. Jared Butler finally declaring that he'll go to the NBA and announces he'll go pro. Is there anything more that he could have done at Baylor? It just seems like this guy is ready to be an NBA player.
Jared Butler is a very, smart guy, both on the court and the classroom, and, all around just a smart guy. And why not, Drake, go out on top? I mean, there would have been, a lot of stars that would have to have aligned for Baylor, to have another national championship season. And as a player, it just makes sense to go out on top. He did everything that he could there, got a national championship banner that'll be hanging, in that arena for years and years, and definitely a name that will, be remembered forever at Baylor. So, he made us wait till the very last minute, announcing his NBA, declaring to go. And this is something, he did a year ago and tested the NBA waters and went through that process. But it just seemed like the time was right. And, I wasn't surprised. I was just waiting really for the minute that it was going to come. But yeah, made it go down to the very wire.
Morgan, over to baseball and softball. Baylor baseball, out of the conversation for most people. I mean, D1 baseball, Baseball America, CWS 24/7 all remarked that Baylor baseball was off of the bubble. There was no way they were making it in or even going to be in the conversation. Lo and behold, 64 teams make it in, and their Baylor lands at number 65. Number one, were you expecting Baylor to even be that close in this postseason conversation?
Gosh, I mean, again, call me a Big 12 homer, but I did expect them to get in, even with, going 0-2 in the Big 12 tournament. Just what they had done earlier in the season. I think the committee really overlooked, a lot of things earlier on. But at the same time, they were consistent in, showing that conference championships, conference tournaments really do, play into the importance of, where teams get in. I mean, you look at, in Alabama, they were part of the last four in, and they won 2 games there in the SEC championship tournament where, Baylor, they just, unfortunately laid an egg there. And, they dealt with COVID issues down the stretch, and they dealt with, a lot of adversity, and probably in a, non-COVID in a normal year, this team would have gotten in. You look at just number 2 RPI conference, just 4 teams in the Big 12 getting in. It did surprise me quite a bit.
Morgan, with that, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, and Texas all finding their way into the postseason. Baylor without a series win against any of them aside from Texas Tech. Really, does it feel like Baylor was just kind of one win out in this one?
I think that's a great way to put it. And those, last 2 series, really where they could have done some things against Oklahoma and against Oklahoma State came up short. Again, every week we talk about it, but we knew that those 2 were going to be so important for their seeding in the Big 12 tournament. But little did we know just how important those games, were for them, and those series wins, what could have been in order for them to get in. And so they are, the first team out. So they're listed, as an alternate, but, it is disappointing. But I guess when you look at what they did against those 3 teams, 3 national seeds now, Baylor did go 3-6. So if they had maybe picked up one more win against those, top teams, that maybe would have been their ticket into the NCAA tournament.
I know you touched on it, but to focus in a little bit more, you talked about the number 2 RPI conference in the nation. You got 3 top 8 teams that'll host for regionals and super regionals. Whether it would have been Oklahoma, Kansas State, or Baylor, does it feel puzzling that the Big 12 did only get 4?
It does. I mean, you look at what, take Kansas State, for example, what they were able to do in the Big 12 tournament. I mean, they played TCU so close in that very first game, and then, had a revenge factor later on in the tournament, but then ended up falling short. And they were the number 7 seed in this Big 12 tournament. So it's pretty amazing to think, just from top to bottom. You can also say, West Virginia knocking off Texas there, not that they would have gotten in, but just overall looking at the strength of this conference as a whole, it is, a little bit puzzling to only have less than half of our teams make it, and with that being said, you also look at just how top heavy the Big 12 is, and the, strength of schedule was such a big factor. I mean, they had announced that on the NCAA selection show. That was the reason that Alabama got in. You just kind of wonder why, a Baylor wasn't factored in, considering this is the number 2 conference in the nation.
Well, Morgan, moving from Baylor to the teams that made it in, the Texas Techs, TCU, Texas, Oklahoma State, did it feel like the seeding for each of those teams from your perspective was fair? I mean, looking at my assessment of each of those, very interesting to me that Texas landed at 2. It favored Texas Tech for them to be at 8. TCU, I like their spot at 6. What do you make of this field?
If to be honest, looking at it, it does make sense. And I think, Kyle, who you had on just before me, made a really good point that they didn't want to put a number 1 and number 2 overall seeds, being from the same conference. So I think that's maybe why Texas got the edge at number 2 overall. I think you could make an argument for them being there where they were actually seated, or maybe, one back at number 3, but gotta like where they're at and definitely have, a great path to come out of their regional. And then TCU, when you look at where they were a week ago before this tournament, they kind of had to win this whole thing in order to be a top 8 national seed. They really had struggled down the stretch of conference play, and even took a non-conference series loss against an opponent they definitely shouldn't have. So I think TCU, they've got their rhythm back, got their mojo back in all the aspects, and one of the things that they've struggled with is consistency on the mound, and I think they did a much better job of coming out of that. And also their lineup looked really explosive compared to, what we saw from Texas, looking a little bit flat. And for Texas Tech, they were a team that we also thought had the potential and were likely a top 8 national seed lock, but had to, probably pick up a couple wins there in the Big 12 tournament, and they did just that. And I think their regional is a little bit tougher with UCLA there at number 2. I think they could potentially pose some problems, but all in all, these are 3 teams that are poised to come out of their regionals and keep moving on and keep representing the Big 12 on the national stage.
Morgan, taking a bit of a deep dive into a couple of these regionals and the way they pan out. Like you mentioned, just talked to Kyle about his thoughts on some of these. You got Texas facing Arizona State at home. They've got Fairfield, a team that started 33-0 this season and ended up finishing out as second in their respective conference, making it as an at-large. That Arizona State team was decent, okay in the Pac-12. Southern as well in there. They were 2 seed in their respective conference, sneaking in by winning their conference tournament. Seems like Texas got maybe an easier draw in their regional along with that number 2 overall seed.
Definitely. I mean, there's no question about that. They are by far the favorite to come out of there. Looking at, the number 2 seed being Arizona State. I think when you look across all of these regionals, the one thing that is just, crazy to think about is just how strong some of these number 2 seeds are. I mentioned the Lubbock regional, UCLA there at number 2. The Tucson regional, we got, our Oklahoma State team for the Big 12 as a number 2 seed. And then at the Fort Worth regional, you have a dangerous Oregon State team who, they bring back some pieces. They just won a national championship back in 2018. So they have some of those veteran pieces that knows, what it takes to, get there and win this whole thing. So I think, when you look across the Big 12 teams and where they are regional wise, Texas by far does have the easiest draw to move on. But again, I think hopefully they've fixed some things and, learned some things and some things to take away from the Big 12 tournament because their lineup, offensively, they did look a little bit flat.
Morgan, I'm glad you mentioned Oregon State at TCU. Taking a deep dive into the Fort Worth Regional, number 6 TCU has McNeese State, who won the Southland Conference. Dallas Baptist, they won their conference. Indiana State was able to get I don't want to say that because I don't remember correctly, but Dallas Baptist is in, and then Oregon State also there. DBU, they're perennially in the tournament. Oregon State, 2018 national champions. Fort Worth is going to have to play well to TCU because it's a tough field.
That it is. But then again, Fort Worth, they're definitely going to pack that place, and TCU is going to have plenty of fans there to pull for them. But I do think, that number 2 seed, Oregon State, could present some challenges for TCU there. But I really like the way that they're playing right now. And I think, if they're able to continue building on the momentum and what they were able to string together there at the Big 12 championship, coming off of, a championship win where they won the championship there, but, with the regular season, they had to share that title with Texas. And I think one of the things that, really stuck out to me throughout this past week with TCU is they're playing with a chip on their shoulder. It came down to the wire in the regular season where they had the opportunity to outright win that, Big 12 title, but weren't able to get it done against Kansas State in that regular season finale. And then it was just so fitting they had to face the Wildcats, numerous times throughout the past week of the tournament. But I think TCU's, they're playing with, a whole different type of mojo to me, the way, this whole team is coming together. It's the bats and also the pitching that, they're clicking in all of the right cylinders, and they've had bits and pieces throughout this entire season of looking like a team that could win this entire thing. And I think right now they're playing really well, and that's when you want to play well. It's survive and advance at this point.
Morgan, over to Texas Tech in Lubbock, the 8 seed Texas Tech, and how it's so huge that they got to be the 8 to host for regional, super regional, because it's so tough for anybody to win in Lubbock. They get Army, UCLA, and North Carolina. North Carolina was a surprise to me. They made it into the tournament, but they did. UCLA is a team that's been spotty this season, but it's a Pac-12 powerhouse that's usually right there. They're a decade removed from a couple of championships. Lubbock, again, granted they're at home, but they're going to need that.
Yeah, you mentioned North Carolina. They were one of those last 4 teams in over Baylor, 47th with their RPI. So, they were a little bit of a surprise team. But again, I mentioned they have to face, number 2 UCLA. And this was, I had listened to an interview with head coach John Savage for UCLA. And one of the things that they've really talked about is how they've really built this team having a road identity. So that's a little bit dangerous. They're coming into Lubbock, they're 14-9 on the road, and they hang their hats on pitching and defense. So UCLA is, I think, going to be, pretty tough competition for Texas Tech here. They swept Arizona State, who was a number 2 seed in the Austin Regional, like we talked about. But they're a team playing with a whole lot of confidence right now, and they've won their last 4 games. And so, I think if there's a team that maybe does get beat of these 3, top 8 teams in the Big 12, unfortunately, I do think, it would lean toward Texas Tech, but, we'll see.
And then, Morgan, if I am Arizona, I am absolutely I'm just upset with the committee for putting Oklahoma State in the regional. Granted, UCSB and Grand Canyon don't pose a huge challenge, but Oklahoma State's got a real shot to overtake that 5 seed and have a road to the College World Series.
I mean, if you watched any of the Big 12 championship game between TCU and Oklahoma State, they're a dangerous team, and they're dangerous here in the postseason. If you liked offense, they gave you a whole lot of that throughout the tournament. So I do think, it's going to be really interesting, and I do think they're going to pose a really big challenge there in their regional, and they have the potential to break out, as a number 2 seed. So we'll see what happens, but, being the Big 12 homer I'm giving them an edge here.
Morgan, moving over to the Women's College World Series that kicks off tomorrow, noon, Oklahoma taking on James Madison, which is a really intriguing matchup after James Madison went on the road to Missouri and won. They went on the road and won a Tennessee regional, went and beat Missouri in a super regional in Como, and now they get Oklahoma on the nation's biggest stage in college softball. And then Georgia and Oklahoma State, which is a very intriguing matchup. We could see on Friday in the nightcap Oklahoma State squaring off toe-to-toe with a trip to the semifinal on the line.
Wouldn't it just be great? I mean, to have Bedlam there in Oklahoma City, with 2 teams that, how great is it though for just the entire state of Oklahoma, for the Big 12 conference to have that potential. But they're playing 2 really good teams. I guess, first taking a look at what Oklahoma has to get through. I mean, there's no question they're the number 1 team in the country. They swept the National Player of the Year awards. It was the first time since these awards have been around. Jocelyn Allo winning Player of the Year, Tiare Jennings winning Freshman of the Year. That news, came out last night. I mean, this is by far probably, it might be the best offense we've ever seen in college softball history. So something super special. And the way that they, on national TV, the first time that ABC had ever had, college softball on, I mean, all eyes, the entire country watching this game between Oklahoma and Washington. And then, another rule victory for Oklahoma, something that they've done all year. But again, they've got to get past a very talented JMU team. Odyssey Alexander, what she has done, throwing over 600 pitches in the postseason, just absolutely incredible. And it's such a great thing too for these mid-major teams to really show that they have the potential, to get to a big stage. And it's a really great story. I do expect though Oklahoma to be able to take care of business. And then for Oklahoma State and Georgia, I mean, Georgia is one of the teams that was able to take down the Sooners earlier this season in the first game of a doubleheader. So definitely a dangerous team, although they did struggle down the stretch heading into the SEC tournament, but have been able to find their rhythm as of late. But Oklahoma State, this is, just a team that it's built on blue collar work ethic, and, head coach Kenny Gajewski, this is probably, one of the best teams that he's had. And, talking about his pitcher, Carrie Eberly, and what she's been able to do, and, the confidence that she has every time she takes the circle, they're looking to win game one. And if they can do that, I think the Cowgirls, they're definitely a dangerous team and going to be a tough one to beat.
Well, Morgan, it's a really interesting field. James Madison, for anyone that knows softball, they have been there for the last 10 seasons or so, right there on the cusp of making runs late in the postseason. There's a lot of history with their team. Obviously, Oklahoma is a powerhouse. Georgia finds a way to make it in almost every year. Oklahoma State, so that new blood that has come in. Alabama, Arizona both have plenty of World Series titles. Florida State and UCLA being the same. Really, really intriguing field in Oklahoma City. Before we get you out of here, though, Oklahoma men's golf national championship. Morgan, you're going to have to fill me in on that because I checked out of the men's golf game when Baylor came up a couple strokes short.
Well, speaking of Bedlam, what we could have on Friday in college softball, we honestly could have had a Bedlam national championship in men's golf today, but unfortunately the Cowboys ended up falling short to Pepperdine. So now Oklahoma is the last team standing in the Big 12, and they'll take on Pepperdine here today at 3:30. For Oklahoma, they have 3 seniors. They went 2-0 in the quarters and semis yesterday against Illinois and Arizona State. And so, they really just have to have 3, really strong guys to come out and pick up some victories in order to, win match play. And that's what, Jonathan Brightwell, Quade Cummings, and Logan McAllister did for them yesterday. So the Sooners are, definitely, I think, a favorite to win this one. So coverage begins at 4 p.m. on the Golf Channel. So for anyone watching, be sure to tune in, and potentially the Big 12 could be hoisting another national championship trophy, which Drake is, it's every week I'm coming on here and it's, national championship after national championship. So this has been just a really tremendous spring for the Big 12.
Well, Morgan, before we get you out of here, our Bear Games question of the day today. Favorite all-time Baylor athlete? I love getting the perspective of those that aren't, directly affiliated or cover Baylor as a sole beat. But for you, just in watching sports, the one athlete that stands out to you?
Interesting. So, okay, I'm going to take a little bit different of a approach here. I'm a sucker for a great story. And in my mind, there's really no better story than Freddie Gillespie as of recently. And just because I've gotten to actually interview him and talk with him, I did a piece on him last year, right after COVID hit and things were, completely silent when he was preparing for the NBA draft and, what he was going through. And now to see him, playing in the NBA, going from Division III to, coming to Baylor. And even though he wasn't a part of this national championship winning team, he laid a great foundation for what this team here in 2021 was able to do. So I'm going to go, Freddie Gillespie, someone, in recent years, someone that I've gotten to cover and gotten to know. So a little bit of a different take there.
Well, Morgan, I will lock it in. Freddie Gillespie now starting in the NBA, has started games for the Raptors, coming off of playing D3. An unbelievable story and a unique perspective to have him at that number 1 spot. But Morgan, I want to thank you for coming on. Let's do it again in the heat, really, of a College World Series.
Drake, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to joining you next week.
Always a pleasure. Thanks again. Morgan Uber, Big 12 digital correspondent. When we come back from this break,